Hi everyone and welcome to week 11. This is our last week of new content and today we're going to be discussing assessing risk and dangerousness. So let's get straight into it. I will give a note of caution that we are covering some material today that is of a little bit of a distressing nature. So as such, if you need to contact one of the student counsellors, we have Lynn at Mount Gravatt and we have Chris at the Gold Coast. So I'll leave those slides in there for you if you need them, or for anything else. You don't need to just contact them on something that could be distressing from a lecture. You can contact them about anything you might need help with. Okay, so learning objectives for this week. So by the end of this week, you should be able to understand the duty to warn and protect as a practitioner, such as a psychologist. What is your duty to warn or protect a client if you think they could be in danger, or warn or protect a client that you think might be pushing the boundaries and going too far? We're going to explain predicting dangerousness and its limitations, because it really is not an accurate art trying to predict how dangerous a person will be. We're going to distinguish between clinical and structured approaches and identify how to predict recidivism. So look at some of the different statistical methods that are used and explain the issues in predicting risk and dangerousness. So today we're going to look at the case of Tatiana Tarasov, and this is a case that shows why it is necessary to report if you know someone is in danger. We're going to look at those clinical methods that I spoke of. We're going to discuss predicting recidivism. How do we predict if someone is going to commit more crime? We're going to look at preventative detention, which is keeping people in prison past the end of their sentence, and we'll look at a Queensland case, the case of Robert John Farden, who is a well-known Queensland sex offender. And as I said, the issues in predicting risk and dangerousness. Okay, so introduction. So what we're trying to do here with making these decisions regarding risk and dangerousness is predicting the future. And if you go on to be a criminal psychologist, this is the kind of work that you're going to do. But prediction of future behaviour is really difficult. It's not easy, as people are going to change their behaviour due to the circumstances. So, I could predict that you're all calm and rational people who would travel home from being out or at college without any incident. But what if someone tried to run you off the road, then approached you aggressively? You could change into someone different. I know people who change when they drink. They become totally different people. So we can predict how someone will generally behave, but if you're put into a difficult situation, the behaviour could change considerably. So consideration is given by psychologists to the following: protecting the general public. So should someone be paroled or kept in prison to protect the general public? And how do we do this? Protecting staff of institutions from very violent offenders. So we know, or I do anyway, that at least one staff member, possibly more, has been injured at Brisbane Correction Centre when they went back into full lockdown a couple of weeks ago and they rioted and set things on fire. One of the staff members was headbutted. So we need to be able to protect our staff that are working in those institutions. We need to be able to protect other inmates, because not all inmates are going to cause problems, and we need to be able to protect those who are not causing a problem or who may become targets of other inmates. We need to maybe separate them out. Should we separate them out? And we need to protect individuals from self-harm and suicide, whether the public believes that they should be or should not be. We need to protect them. They are still human beings. So risk and dangerousness, we need to understand, are two different things. So risk is the likelihood of an act occurring, so the likelihood of them committing an act. There could be a really, really high risk, but it could be a really minor offence, so it's not always correlated. And dangerousness is the likely severity of the act. So are we looking at shoplifting versus homicide? So now let's talk about the duty to warn and protect. And the case study here is of Tatiana Tarasov and Mr. Potter. So Potter became obsessed with Tatiana after her brother introduced her to him. And she was not really interested in pursuing a relationship with him. So he eventually did seek counselling from a psychologist on the university campus. And during a session with that psychologist, he confessed that he planned to kill her. She was away on holidays at the time, so was in no immediate danger. So the psychologist informed 2 other professionals at the clinic, and they decided that he should be involuntarily admitted to the psychiatric unit. So involuntary committing someone is difficult, as they have to do something really, really serious for the psychiatrists to make this decision. So in order to bring him in, they called the campus police. So the campus police were notified to detain him and take him to the hospital. But they decided that he was quite rational, and they warned him to stay away from her, and they were satisfied that he would do that. And I can hear you all going, because campus police don't have medical training. So I guess you can figure out what's going to happen here. Once the campus police spoke to Potter, he ceased seeing his psychologist because he might have felt that he couldn't trust any of these medical professionals anymore because they'd gone to the police. Then all the documentation was allegedly ordered to be destroyed by the director of the clinic when he learned that Potter had not been committed. So Tatiana came back from holidays. He went to her home to speak to her. She refused, and he shot her with a pellet gun and then chased her and stabbed her repeatedly, and she died as a result. I wonder how the campus police are feeling now. Their warning off works so well. So after the death, he called the police himself and pleaded guilty by reason of insanity. So he was trying to not be held responsible for the crime. He was found guilty of second-degree murder, although that was later overturned. Her parents commenced a lawsuit against the university for failing to detain him, but more importantly, for failing to warn their daughter of his threats. So who is responsible for what here? Should the psychologists and psychiatrists have done more, or did they do enough? Whoops. Okay. So I want you to watch that portion of the Tarasov case where we have a psychologist talking to students about the duty to warn and protect, and then come back. Okay, so what's come out of the Tarasov case was that things changed a bit in America. The psychologist now has a duty to warn an intended victim that they may be in danger. So a ruling was made that a psychologist has a duty to warn the person against whom a threat is made. They also have a duty to protect, and this requires the psychologist to take active steps to protect the potential victim, but not necessarily warn them. And this changed again a couple of years later. So you don't necessarily here need to tell the person directly, as there are issues around that, like panicking them or overstating the threat, but they have to try and stop any harm coming to the intended victim. So have a think here. If you were the victim of someone who was stalking you or had made threats against you, and you get a message or a phone call or whatever from a psychologist informing you that you could be in danger, how's that going to change your behaviour? How's that going to change your life? How's that going to change your thought processes? So these are all things that we need to think about when it comes to this duty to warn and duty to protect. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we should leave potential victims hanging out there with no protection, but we need to be very careful with how we do these things. In Australia, we don't have the Tarasov ruling. So we have this section where it says that psychologists can disclose confidential information under those terms. How hard would it be to have a good relationship with your psychologist if you're not bound by confidentiality? So these give the psych the ability to disclose under these circumstances. Legal obligation revolves around being subpoenaed by the court once a crime's been committed. But the second one is what is more relevant to us today, although it is still open to judgment. So if there is an immediate and specified, so a level of detail of what they are going to do to make it more likely, risk of harm to an identifiable person or persons that can be averted only by disclosing information. So the psychologist would be asking themselves, can I avert this without disclosing, or will it only help this person and the intended victim if I disclose? Very difficult decision making going on here. Criminal psychologists will hear about criminal activity and decisions need to be made by them about disclosure. And it can be quite loose and flexible, and it takes a lot of discretion to decide. Okay, that ends part one, where we've talked about the duty to warn and protect. In part two, we're going to discuss how practitioners actually assess risk and dangerousness.